Want to go to historian Thomas Alan Schwartz, author of Henry Kissinger, An American Power, a Political Biography. Thomas, great to have you. You know, we go back and forth on this. It's the little things that have always interested me about Dr. Kissinger over the years. He had a very dry but key sense of humor and a good way of even mocking himself. I think that kind of got him through the extreme press coverage he would get. You know, some praising, others condemning. Even now, Rolling Stone and others saying that, you know, he was a debacle, et cetera. He probably would have just snickered that off. But what do you think?
Well, he could get sensitive. I mean, I think some of the more aggressive attacks on him did bring out his defensive-ness. But you're right, he diffused a lot of criticism with self-deprecating humor, and he did have a very sharp wit that he deployed both in negotiations and meetings and all the rest. And so I think in that sense, this was one of the reasons I think he was able to maintain such a good relations with a very different political cast of characters over the years. He was probably one of the last figures who really represented a certain bipartisanship in American foreign policy and political life. You know,
we don't appreciate the fact he was associated with Republican presidents. He advised all presidents, you know, dating back to JFK in one way, shape, or form. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think Kissinger always prided himself on the fact that he could be above politics. Now, he wasn't completely, and in fact, in my book, I make the case that he understood that domestic politics was very important in American foreign policy and recognized the needs of his president, for example, to win election in 1972, these sorts of things. But he did celebrate the idea as an immigrant and as someone who really loved America that he should be able to talk to all presidents. And he did really quite effectively he helped Jimmy Carter get the Panama Canal Treaty passed. He worked with Ronald Reagan on advising about the Soviet Union and the Middle East. George H.W. Bush sent him to meet Gorbachev. Bill Clinton also brought him in when they were dealing with issues on China. So I do think he had a belief in the presidency and American institutions that was quite powerful and that transcended political parties.
You know, that's very well put, Thomas. And one of the things that occurs to me is his long history and this cycle we went through. First of all, you know, getting President Nixon to visit China, he set that up. But he recognized the potential force that China was and had a very clear idea of the potential threat it could be. Do you know, in his winding years, where he thought that relationship would go, where he thought the Taiwan situation would go, whether our two nations would ever come to blows?
He worried about this a great deal. He talked about being in the foothills of a new Cold War with China. This was a concern he had. In fact, back in the period when he was first setting up the relationship, he talked about the idea that we might have to balance against China with Russia. Now, of course, that's not been the case, but he worried a great deal about it. But he also saw the potential. And in his book on China, he talked about the idea that the United States and China should be able to work together, that the consequences of a war, given the technological developments, the horrific possibilities of what the destruction that a war would bring, should be a sobering thing for both sets of leaders so that they should be able to work out their differences. Specifically on Taiwan, he recognized the idea that Taiwan was a part of China, that both sides recognized it as a part of China, and he tried to discourage any Taiwanese independence moves. But at the same time, he, of course, also deeply encouraged Chinese leaders to approach the task of possible reunification from as a peaceful means. And now I think Kissinger was one of those who believed that China might liberalize the more it economically developed. On that, he was proven wrong.
Let me ask you a more personal question about him. He lived to be 100 years old, and it wasn't as if he ate all the right things. In fact, far from it. He ate all the wrong things. And there was one great story about him that while he loved to watch sports, he never participated in any. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not good. And then I'm thinking, well, he lived to be 100. So what was that about?
Well, this is one of those cases where you could talk about good genes. Both of his parents
Right.
lived well into the 90s, and his brother, also only recently passed away, also lived well into his 90s. He had quadruple heart surgery back in the 1980s, and this was often commented to me when I did interviews that people were amazed that he lived as long as he did, given that surgery's record. So I think he was also mentally always sharp, and he was continuing to write books. He still had 2 books on his agenda. When he talked with Bloomberg News recently, he was telling them that he was writing 2 additional works.
Wow.
So I think he's a case which might testify to the mind over matter in some ways in terms of his own physical constitution.
Yeah, I think you hit on something there. You have to be into all of this stuff and be engaged in the world and the news and the exciting stuff of the world. Then you can eat anything you want. That's apparently my quick read on it. Thomas, an honor to have you on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me on the program.